Shang Chi and The Legend of Ten Rings. And something like a Marvel movie, for example, they basically demand pixel perfect images as much as humanly possible.
How do you become a compositor?
Taking the real stuff and the fake stuff and smashing them together, basically. It doesn't really matter what your software is, you can get the same results. In Sydney, in summer, in Australia, where the sunlight is very harsh, it's so good here. Everyone gets sunburn, it's excellent. Birds, bugs, everything. There's small bears that drop out of trees and try to kill you. Animal logic in Sydney. Something like Blender. I'm not sure I'd enjoy that. You should just quit. There's no hope for you. Oh no, there's so many things I'm not allowed to talk about, but I can talk about that.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Subsurface Talks, the podcast where I interview guests from CGI industry, mainly Blender community, but let's not limit it to just like something software specific. We're just talking about image creation, digital art, meaning of life, you name it. Today, I have a very special guest, someone who's been working on big titles that probably most of you have watched. Things like Thor, Love and Thunder, or Star Wars Andor, or Rings of Power. Today with me is Mr. Daniel Nees.
Hi. So, my name's Daniel, and I'm a compositing artist currently at Rising Sun Pictures in Adelaide, Australia. Everyone in this line of work sort of moves around a fair bit, so I might not be there at some point in the future. So I've worked on TV shows, advertising. I've worked in movies and streaming shows and all sorts of things. So yeah, and I also work for CG Boost as a community manager, and I work a lot in 3D as well. So
So that's how kind of we met. I first known you from the work that you do in Blender, and then I found out that you do such great work in the compositing area.
I do my best.
And that's sometimes something a little bit neglected by some 3D artists, at least to a certain point. I remember my past when I was learning 3D, and I discovered compositing quite late. And it was like a revelation that there's something like that, and you can do so much stuff in post-production. And it really makes things easier. Like maybe sometimes it's longer first when you need to learn it, but then it just allows for all the magic just in post-production. So maybe tell me a little bit how you really started this whole journey to CGI and why compositing. Like, how do you become a compositor?
So aside from annoying my entire family by trying to get them to star in my terrible films when I was a teenager, I didn't really pursue it as a job at all for a long while. I started trying to do a bit of teaching and a bit of engineering and a whole bunch of different things. And then I ended up doing programming for a bit. And the way we were being taught programming is to make games. And I found that when I was making the graphics for my games, I was enjoying it a lot more. So then I went and did a course on game graphics. And they taught film and games parallel at first, and then they branch off later in the course. And I gravitated towards film more because you weren't as limited. So I went down that way, and then I got a sort of trainee sort of position working for a film studio where it was basically a course that they ran, a free course where they taught you how to do rotoscoping and paintwork, which for those who don't know is sort of like cutting things out from the footage and removing things like tracking markers and wires and things. I got taught to do that sort of thing there, and a sort of relatively natural progression from rotoscoping and paint work is to move into compositing, which is sort of how that company at least runs it, and a few other companies run it that way too. So I just sort of slid into compositing, and I've been there pretty much ever since. And the 3D stuff with Blender was more of a hobby for a long time, just because it was a bit different. And I liked the idea of making my own images and things. And it's only fairly recently turned into a professional thing. That's pretty much my backstory.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. When I talk with 3D artists or like generally people in the industry, like a lot of them is like they started out doing something completely different and then just like slowly gravitated towards something else. Like for me, it was like starting out as an interior designer and then archviz steadily towards graphics, and I just landed as a 3D artist. Like,
Yeah, I think it's one of those fields, CGI stuff, where it's not something that many people go into straight away, just because, aside from anything else, there's so many different areas of it. So you might not think that you're all that interested in it, and it just so happens that this is one particular, very specific area of it that you're really interested in, but you don't know about it until you've been doing something completely different for a while, and you just sort of fall into it at a certain point. But at least that was the way for me and a bunch of people I know. So I've got a couple of friends. One was a chef for 10 years, and then he just decided he was bored doing that and he likes movies, so he's going to try working in movies. And I've worked on him. I worked with him on a bunch of movies now, so he did well to do that. And there's just endless stories of people doing that sort of thing. So
yeah, so
yeah.
if you can share kind of like a secret of your career path, how do you land a job working for a company that's doing the big titles, like I mentioned some of the titles that are in your portfolio, like latest like the Rings of Power or Andor, so things like people dream of working on such titles.
Yeah, well, I sure as hell didn't see myself doing that sort of thing. No, even after I started, I thought, oh yes, this is nice. It won't last long. For me, I think it was just giving it a go to start with, just sort of see how far I get, because I was very very unsure of what I wanted to do at that point. So I was just kind of doing it because I was vaguely interested in it. Really, I didn't think it was a proper career path that I could actually pursue and maintain. And I got a little bit lucky because a company that was relatively near to where I lived, which is Animal Logic in Sydney, they're pretty famous for movies like Happy Feet and the Peter Rabbit movies recently and things like that. The Lego movies. They ran this training course that was free, and they seemed to have a fair few connections with the college that I went to. And I didn't even apply for it. I don't actually know how they got my details, but they emailed me and asked if I wanted to do it. So I said yes to that, and thankfully my workplace let me take annual leave for that month. So I was able to go and do that. And then from that, you just get straight into doing a job if you did well enough in the course. So that's kind of how I got into it. But even after you've had your first job, uh, it's a line of work where word of mouth and experience are far more important than anything else. So even after you've had it one job, like it's good, that's the hardest one to get. But even at that point, most companies won't hire you. It's it's a lot of luck and a lot of persistence and a lot of just constantly trying to teach yourself how to improve your skills and trying to make as many connections as you can to some degree. It's a tricky thing to get started, but once you get started, then it's it gets easier as time goes on. At least it did for me. And being tight-lipped about what you're working on, that's also important. Unfortunately, a lot of people have had difficulties finding work after they spilled the beans on something. It's
Yeah,
a bit
that's what I
unfortunate.
wanted to talk about a little bit. The whole thing, like working in a big production, there's like a lot of NDA involved, and most of the time, like people kind of in the credits, some were low, you know, in the long credits that no one really watches as apart from the people interested in the industry, or and like, do you enjoy this kind of a position where you're kind of like the man behind the scenes rather than someone like more celebrator, or like having your own creation in the front?
Oh, look, I do enjoy just being sort of a small part of a larger thing to some degree. There are pros and cons to being more prominent, being in more significant positions. Generally, I've found, at least from talking to people in those sort of more senior positions, there's your life basically goes on hold while while the production is going. If you're in a more senior position, and if you're someone who's in charge of a good chunk of the production, so say for example you're a supervisor on this big production or whatever, while that production is running, you're doing often 7-day weeks and long hours, and because there's just so much to keep on top of, and I'm not sure I'd enjoy that. um, but yeah, I mean, it's a little bit disappointing sometimes that the CG artists, particularly these days, when just about every movie has just sorry, my cat's being insane. Just pages and pages and pages of CG artists on so many movies at the moment. It's a bit disappointing that we're basically at the bottom, um, especially because we put in like weeks and weeks and weeks, months of our lives into these things, and so often it's one of the most obvious things to criticize and things. But honestly, it's still exciting. Every time your name comes up, it's a woo sort of moment. It doesn't really matter how far down you are as long as you're in there, which is definitely something that doesn't always happen. But it just doesn't really bother me too much. It being that low, it's just exciting to be a part of it a lot of the time,
Yeah.
at least for me.
Yeah, I remember talking to Bartek Skorupa some time ago. He's the guy behind the No Wrangler add-on, and also he's running a post-production house of his own
Mm.
here in Poland. And he was showcasing his work as a post-production artist, or he was showing some kind of a commercial or thing. And like he said, that the core of this work is really to make people not see your work because you're just like removing
Yes.
stuff from it, like collaging stuff and doing all the things that
Yeah.
people should not notice that there was something done with the images.
Yeah. There's certainly an element of that. I mean, it's hard to get away from it sometimes. Like if you've got a like a Marvel movie or something, and the background's obviously not real. Obviously that sort of stuff's going to be seen. But the idea is to have it so that the line, the sort of the line where the real stuff stops and the fake stuff starts, you can't tell where that is. That's kind of generally the goal. And if it is something that is meant to look real, like say for example, a good one is that movie Sully, which is about the plane crash, or the what was a water landing with Tom Hanks. That one had that big plane crashing in the Hudson River sequence, and you want that to look as real as possible, as perfectly believable as possible. Or just someone being on a boat and looking out a window, and out of the window is a blue screen, but it needs to look like ocean, that kind of thing. That's where you want it to be invisible, and that is an annoying thing for a CG artist, because you're trying to point out, no, 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 none of that's real, I swear. Um, but it's so frequently the case that you can't convince people because you've done a good job. And it's gratifying in
Yeah,
a weird
I
sort
thought
of
that
way.
maybe if someone really doesn't get the whole doesn't know how it looks like from behind the scenes, the compositing workflow, like how would you describe what you do, like what's your job to I don't know, someone who's a total layman, like your
Ah,
grandma or auntie, whatever.
yep. Yeah, I've done this a few times, particularly to my grandparents. I would say taking the real stuff and the fake stuff and smashing them together, basically, and making them look as good as possible. Um, that, and removing things that people don't want visible. Basically, those are the two main elements to the job, really. I mean, it's obviously more complex than that, but that's the gist of it. That is compositing in a nutshell. And then the 3D stuff is basically making 3D objects. This pretty much the
Mhm.
gist of that
And
too.
you
So
mentioned like this whole style
yeah.
of making things seem realistic, like there's a whole like whole it's like genre of CGI. I'd say like it's a photorealistic one, and there's also like the Marvel movies that you're working. It's like kind of like in between something stylized, like it's comic book based, and a lot of realistic stuff
Yeah.
in an unreal world. And also there are movies like the
Mm.
Spider-Verse, which are going straight into the stylized, very very much graphic,
Yeah.
artistic direction. Like, is there like from your work experience, is there a lot of that artistic, stylized, abstract direction also in the compositing world, or most of these things are kind of like going for real?
Well, it certainly is far more common for things to be more photoreal, just because most of the time movies that come out are with real actors and things like that. But you do quite regularly get, depending on what company you work for, because different companies have different specialties. And for example, the one Animal Logic, the one that I mentioned before, they sort of have two specialties. One is set extension work, which is basically when you have like a blue screen or something and you want to make the environment seem bigger. Um, and then they also have sort of full 3D animated things is the other sort of specialty that they have, like the Lego movies and things like that, Happy Feet and whatnot. Um, and when you're working in a company like that, you do tend to sort of move between projects that are more photoreal and projects that are more stylized, and it's sort of the same sort of processes, sort of irrelevant of what thing you're on. Something as heavily stylized as the Spider-Verse movies, they've probably got a lot of the work. I'm speaking as a guess because I didn't work on that, but a lot of that would probably be done in 3D and 2D animations, and then like the compositing is sort of there to bring it all together at the end. But it's just again the same sort of processes. Really, you're taking the different image layers and all the different data passes and things that people from other departments give you, and using those to make the best looking image you can. So
All right. So like digging
yeah.
into that whole compositing workflow, I would want to ask you two questions. Like these are like the same but opposite questions. Like one, which is the
Okay.
most exciting part of this work, and which one is the most tedious part that you would
Mhm.
gladly pass to your worst enemy or AI or whatever? Just take it from me.
Okay, well, it's not AI. It's just straight out the gate. I don't. The company I work for now, Rising Sun, they're actually using a lot of AI to help us out. Things like using AI to do face replacements on stunt actors, things like that. So you don't need to try to like manually put the actor's face on there. The AI does like a deep fake kind of thing. They just replace it, and then you have to just sort of blend them together, things like that. So AI, I've found so far at least, has been quite helpful, not actually a hindrance at all. Um, but I'd say the most enjoyable part for me is there's a meeting that happens once or twice a day called dailies. And this is basically where everyone's work that needs to be up for review gets put up on this huge screen. Depending on the size of the company, it could be a TV or it could be like a theater screen. And basically, everyone comes in and looks through everyone else's work, and you get to see like all these images coming together. And yeah, it's really fun and exciting to see how different people are making all these images work together. And you get to see previews of things that haven't come out yet and stuff like that, which is also cool fun. So yeah, that's always good fun and enjoyable, and you always get good feedback and things like that from just the best artists on the planet. Um, and yeah, that's a really fun and really enjoyable part of my day. Some people don't like it as much as me, but for me, that's the part I really like. Um, I'd say the most tedious part. is probably what we call tech checks, which are basically once all the creative stuff is done, and the client's happy with all the work that we've done. Yeah, at that point, we now have to start making it perfect. It's never going to be perfect, but doing things like if there are people that were taken off a blue screen, making like the edges have to be exactly perfect, and like getting as many of the hairs and all that sort of thing, keeping as much of that detail as possible, and making sure that the focus is right on CG elements, and just oh goodness, depending on the scale of the production, something like a Marvel movie, for example. Those are some of the biggest productions on the planet, and they basically demand pixel perfect images as much as humanly possible. And they are going over every pixel of your image and making sure that everything looks as good as it possibly could. And if there's any tiny little error anywhere, it'll get pinged. It'll be sent back to you, and you have to fix it. And sometimes, depending on how careful you were, or how difficult the plate might be, the footage rather. That's a plate is a technical term for the footage. It can, like, there have been shots I've done where that process is going backwards and forwards for weeks, on a particular shot, like on and off. You're not just doing that one thing, but yeah, like one shot that just refuses to die. And that can get very, very tedious very, very quickly. But yeah, it's certainly not AI. I've found AI to be pretty helpful for the most part.
Yep. Just taking this
Yes.
whole technical overload out of an artist. But you mentioned that the fun thing is, I'd say that it's kind of like a community thing, like making some things in a bigger team, and just enjoying the process, looking at something that's being developed. So it kind of like makes sense that you are also working as a community manager for CG Boost. So I just wanted to ask you, like,
Yeah.
how did that start? Yeah.
Quick plug.
How did that start, that adventure?
um, well, because as I mentioned before, 3D was kind of a hobby initially for me. I joined in a couple of the challenges that CG Boost runs, um, and I'd been in that community for a few years, just sort of trying to get better at 3D work. And just trying to make things that looked vaguely convincing, because some of my early work was absolutely dreadful. And I thought it was amazing. But I didn't understand how anyone could keep finding problems with it. But yeah, so anyway, I was in that community for quite a while. And after a few years, I just messaged a couple of people, Zach being one of them, and just said, look, if you need any help, just like answering questions, or if there's anything else, like anything I can do at all, just let me know, please, because I would like to help out and add to the community that's been built here. And he messaged back and said they were looking for people to help out, so I just got a job like straight away, which was pretty amazing. And it's been really cool working with them since, because in my time there, I've met a whole bunch of people that I used to watch. I used to watch their videos on YouTube just to learn how to do stuff, and now I talk to these people like they're good friends of mine that I've known for years, and it's a very strange thing, especially because despite any modicum of success that I might have had, these are still people that seem on a different level to me, which is strange, to talk to them like they're exactly on my level, and that's the imposter syndrome kicking in hard. But yeah, that's it's been good fun.
It's kind of sometimes surreal meeting those people. Like I remember first time I met Gleb Alexandrov, for example. Like, it was like someone from from a different world. When like in the real world, it's like he's just has a different kind of path. Maybe in the certain areas, he's just like way above my level or whatever. But it's like we're all learning, we're all different, and he's just a normal guy, right?
No, that is something that I have noticed is that everyone in this line of work, unless you're a very unusual person, everyone is always trying to improve themselves. Everyone's still learning. Almost no one thinks that they're amazing and fantastic at what they do. Everyone's just trying to do the best that they can. Even the most experienced and advanced people are still watching beginner tutorials here and there, and like trying to pick up new tips and it's and getting learning new things from other artists, and it's a very collaborative effort. Doesn't matter what part of the industry you're in, doesn't matter what element of CG work you're doing, everyone's helping everyone else, and it's a very nice environment to be in. There's very few people that are unpleasant and unhelpful and refuse to do things properly, and those people usually get weeded out very quickly. So yeah.
Yeah, but there's maybe something that sometimes is a little bit divisive, especially in some kind of flame wars on the comments sections and stuff, which is like
Mm.
software based cult. Let's say it, and I wanted to get into that
Oh
a little
yes.
bit because when you're working on the big productions, like you mentioned, yeah, the Marvel movies or stuff like that, you're definitely using like the software that's considered industry standard for compositing, and that is probably Nuke, I'm guessing, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to
Yeah.
ask how
Yeah.
do you get the difference between this industry standard software and Blender?
Well, honestly, particularly in 3D, there really isn't that much of a difference between the industry standard stuff and something like Blender, which isn't quite there yet. Um, it's they're really very similar in most ways. I think Blender's thing is mainly that it's sort of more of a jack of all trades program. So it can sort of do a lot of things quite well. Um, Whereas something like Maya, for example, is extremely good for animation. And it's okay for modeling, but it's mainly used for the animation side of things. And then there's something like ZBrush, and I call it ZBrush. Most people would call it ZBrush, I imagine, but that's just the best for sculpting, as far as most people seem to be concerned. Whereas Blender is okay at sculpting, and something like, but it's useless in most other areas. It's the whole thing is sculpting, and something like 3ds Max is extremely good for modeling, but it's not very good for animation and not very good for sculpting. Like the industry standard stuff tends to be much more specialized. Um, and Nuke is another good example of that. Like it does compositing and it does it really, really well. But it's useless if you want to do anything else with it. Really, it's not an animation or a modeling software or anything like that. It's compositing and like Bredo Paint sort of stuff. That's it. So something like Blender, it does get used even on big productions. My current company uses it a lot for DMP, or digital matte paintings, which are basically like when you don't want to go through the process of making something in 3D. You make a single image that can be projected onto something, or it can be used as a background, that kind of thing. That's it's a bit of a generalization, but that's the gist of it. They use Blender a fair bit at my current company, and it gets used a lot in smaller studios because, aside from the fact that it's free, which is very helpful, again, it covers a lot of ground. So you don't need to have someone who's amazing at Maya and ZBrush and this and this and this and this. You can just have someone who's very good at Blender, and they can cover a lot of it. So it's more of a depends on the situation kind of deal. Um, but yeah, I tend to use Nuke just because that's the one I was taught to use, for one. Um, but there are other softwares that can do the same job, maybe not quite as well, but they can basically do the same job. It just kind of depends on your needs and your budget and the sort of people that you're hiring, and yeah. So it just so happens that a lot of the pipelines that have been built up for a lot of these studios have been built using these more traditional softwares. So shifting over to something like Blender, you would have to basically chuck out all the work that you've done on these other programs and rebuild it for Blender or whatever software that is you're trying to bring in. And that's more work than most companies want to do for something that really, at that scale, the budget for buying licenses is not that big a deal. So, yeah.
And from your experience, because you've probably used also the compositor in Blender, like what like is there like a
Yeah.
super huge gap, like that Blender compositor is really useless in comparison to Nuke, or because it's not like probably the most powerful feature of Blender?
It's definitely not the most powerful feature of Blender, unfortunately. I I'd say you can do quite a lot of the things that you can do in Nuke in Blender. As but basically, it doesn't really matter what your software is. You can get the same results. That's something that I talk about a lot in places like the CG Boost community and stuff. If you want a certain result and you only have a specific compositing software or whatever, you can get that result. It's more just how long it will take, how difficult it might be, etc., etc. So, as far as getting a specific result, you can do that fine. It doesn't really matter what the software is. But I think the biggest difference right now between Blender and Nuke is mainly in the performance. So there are features that Nuke has that Blender doesn't, but I find about 95% of the time they're not really all that necessary. The things the thing that Blender's sort of falling down on for me, compositing wise, is just the speed. So if they have the real time compositing system that they're starting to build up, which is basically only useful in the main 3D viewport before you've actually rendered anything. And that is very quick and very good. But again, if you're trying to use Blender to replace Nuke, you wouldn't be using it that way. You would be using just the compositing section of Blender. And that, regrettably, is incredibly slow. I found that while using it, it is very usable and you can get good results with it. But I found that if you do more than half a dozen sort of operations with it, it gets incredibly slow, and I have to render out what I have and then go off the rendered image that I've just made to make more steps, which is something that Nuke kind of doesn't need to do nearly as often. You can get through a lot more with Nuke before it starts slowing down. And there are even programs that make Nuke look slow, like DaVinci Resolve's compositor. That one is very, very quick. It's way quicker than Blender than Nuke is. It's much, much quicker than Blender. But the main drawback for me is that it's built into a much larger program that doesn't focus on that stuff, which isn't so much of a downside, but it is a little bit more fiddly from a UI point of view, user interface. But it's also a bit more of a learning curve because things are labeled in a strange kind of way, and you have to go and do tutorials on just how to use that particular software, which you can do, and you probably have to do a similar thing with Nuke. I'm just very familiar with it, so it's probably it's probably a similar situation with that. But that one is definitely not an industry standard, although it is a free software that a lot of people use. So you never know what the future holds. That's kind of my experience with that
Yep.
whole.
I guess that DaVinci is like really popular, especially as a video editing software.
Yes, it's fantastic for color grading and editing. It's used a lot for those, but not so much for compositing.
It's kind of understandable because this is like such a huge market, right? Everyone like needs like almost everyone needs to edit some kind of a video footage right now with all the trends that like every social media is going to the video trend, like, so it's kind of like there's a huge demand for that.
Yeah, even Yeah, I mean, even small businesses that have nothing to do with video editing. Like I have a friend that's running a game shop, and he's trying to make videos to obviously promote his shop, but also just to teach people how to play games and things like that. So it's everyone's pretty much everyone is trying to make a video of some kind, and something like that is a very useful tool to have for free. So.
Talking a little bit more about Blender, is there kind of like an area of Blender that's always on your to learn list and you never touch it because there's so much work going on?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's so much to learn in that program. It's one of those programs where every time you think, "Yes, I have finally mastered this area," you find somewhere else, and now I need to learn that too. I think uh, I think sculpting is probably the area that I would like to really dig into next. I think because I like to think that I'm pretty good with hard surface modeling, so making things like buildings and machines and things like that. But organic things like characters and creatures and even simple things, even things like making a cliff face or something like that. That's something that I'm not very good at all, and that's something that I've been trying to get better at. So that's probably my next step. And I would love to get better at some of the more simulation sort of elements, things like making fire and smoke and explosions, and even just things like simple physics, things like trying to make cloth simulations look a bit better and things like that. And yeah, there's quite a few things on my list. There's always my wife gets eternally frustrated with me because I keep saying something like, "Ooh, this would be a cool thing to learn," and she goes, "Oh no, not another one." Um, I've I've got a list about 3 miles long. That's things that I'm wanting to learn and wanting to get better at and wanting to uh, try to try to do.
Yeah, the simulation part is right now in this kind of area where Blender is being developed, like the simulation nodes coming to the Blender 3.6. So maybe it's like good to wait a little bit, or maybe just dive into it straight ahead when it's being developed.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I'd say for me personally, I'm not the sort of person that's super intent on getting the jump on the latest updates. I tend to be someone who's more. I'd rather wait until a more full
Mhm.
feature set is there, and then I'll get into it because guaranteed there'll be a situation where I get halfway through and I'm trying really, really hard to work out how to do something and it's driving me insane. And then a few months later, someone comes out, "Hey, we've got a new tool and it does exactly that thing that took you
Yeah.
6 hours to do before." So, yeah, I think sculpting is probably the area I'll go to next just because I would like to get to the point where I can make a film or something like that from scratch, fully animated, and I can't. I have a lot of trouble doing that when I don't have access to characters and things like that. And being able to make a decent quality character.
This exactly gets me to the point I wanted to touch, and it's the being overwhelmed with too much, to learn because the 3D is such a, making a movie of your
Mm,
own. It's like there are people that are making it, right? S- I've seen like a crazy,
yep.
young creator right now. He's doing something like a vlog, doing a full feature movie of his own. It's quite interesting, but
Hmm.
there's uh, there's a 3D challenge right now that's running, and you've been involved into the teaser for the
Yep.
channel challenge. So I wanted to talk about this a little bit, and it's based on the course by CG Boost, the Cubic Worlds course, and it's kind of like the answer for people who
Hmm.
who
Yep.
are overwhelmed with all the things in 3D that they have to learn. And the idea is basically like taking the cube, the default cube, let's say, the shape that you see when you open Blender.
Yep.
It's like the simplest 3D form, and you just scale it, stretch it, and color it, and make complex scenes out of it, and just like animate it, do all the complicated stuff in a CG production, and you learn it, like limiting yourself to just the cubic form. And that's
Yes, well, it's trying to bring the scope down as much as possible. That's kind of the idea. So the more complicated your scene is, the more detail you try to put into there, the more realism in particular that you try to inject into a project, the harder and longer and more just generally more difficult it becomes to make that thing. It's getting easier and easier, especially with things like AI, like the ability to do motion capture, for example, to really speed up animation. Like I have been dancing around in my living room in front of my phone camera to get some very quick animations for projects and things like that. So it is getting easier, but yeah, something like the cubic world style or any super simplistic sort of style is always going to be easier to make something significant out of it. So yeah, that's something I definitely struggle with because I'm much more. I don't know if it's because of my day job or if it's because of like what I envision myself wanting to make somewhere down the line. But I tend to lean much more towards realism, which is a problem because making something that looks real takes a lot more effort, I find, um, than making something really simple that does basically the same job. Obviously, when you get into things like Pixar movies and things like that, which obviously have a lot of work put into them, it's a different story. But something like this cubic world thing, or like just any super low poly sort of animation is going to be a lot easier to pull off if you're one person in your garage or in your basement or something. Yeah, than trying to pull off a Hollywood style realistic movie with Marvel level CG, and it's not happening for one person, not for a long
Yeah,
time
so
at least.
exactly, like I wanted to just let people know when they listen to the podcast. Probably it will get out, be published before the challenge ends. So if you're listening, if you're one of the early
No.
listeners, just and want to just dig into something like making a cool project, just hop into the CG Boost community. And if you're listening this after the challenge ended, there's always you can always like take the cubic worlds course, or just have fun with making something in this idea, because like I found that this is a really cool playground to just have all those things in control, because you're limiting it yourself to some simple stuff. And probably if you're listening after the challenge
Yeah.
ended, you can watch the whole cool creations that people came up with, and it's also inspiring.
By the time this comes out, I imagine, I don't know how fast your editing process is, but even if there's probably only going to be a week or two left in the challenge, I'd assume, in which case you would have to move very very quickly to get something done in time. But that doesn't mean that you can't make something that was initially designed for the challenge and you end up just making it for fun. There's a half dozen challenges and contests and things that I've tried to make something for in the past, and there's just no way I'm getting it done in time. I had high expectations and they didn't land, and I ended up just finishing it off anyway and just saying this is a cool thing I made. It was supposed to be for that, but yeah, whatever. It's just something cool that I made. But it's also a really good thing, especially in a community like the one at CG Boost. But there's heaps of them where you can get good and constructive feedback, and that I find is the best way to improve your skills is to just try making something for yourself and push yourself to try and do something that you're not sure you're going to be able to do, and then just keep getting feedback on it until it looks amazing. Um, yeah, it just personal projects are my mantra, and they've I think they've helped me probably more than anything else that I've ever done.
Yeah,
So
and it's something that you're not
yeah,
not obliged to be discreet about. So this is something that you can freely share on the social media.
no, yeah, it's really nice. I can talk about what I'm making. Oh no, there's so many things I'm not allowed to talk about, but I can talk about that.
All
So
right, so
yeah,
like
that's
I've
good.
got one community question, because I've asked people on Mastodon
Hmm.
for for some questions to someone who's been compositing in big titles. So the question is, what's something that doesn't seem obvious to the public, like that turned out well, like from your job, if you're allowed to talk about this, because as you mentioned, like, a lot of it is
Oh yeah.
under NDA or whatever, and that turned out well with a lot of effort put into it. So I guess it's all of it, but maybe something specific.
Okay. All right. Well, I'd say the thing for me that I would probably point to in that direction. There was a Marvel movie that came out a while ago called Shang Chi and the Legend of Ten Rings. The Legend of the Ten Rings. And that movie was filmed in Sydney in summer in Australia, where the sunlight is very harsh, famously very harsh. Very, very bright day with no cloud cover. So there were hard shadows on everything, and it was filmed on Australian grass, which is very dry. So it was not as lush and green as you would like. Um, and Basically, it was a practical set, a lot of it, and they'd filmed it all, and it looked all quite good. But then the lighting was too harsh. They wanted it to be a cloudy environment, slightly otherworldly, and it should sort of have a sort of Chinese sort of atmosphere kind of vibe. So, you know, shadowy, sort of very lush green kind of grass. And uh, none of this was possible with the footage that they'd given us. So, what we ended up doing was completely replacing the background. Every single character that was fighting in that big battle at the end was fighting on yellowish, yellowish grass with a very strong yellow sunlight, and we had to replace the environment entirely, cutting them all off the background. Doing We had so many rotoscoping artists thundering out masks for all of the characters in this big battle. And for me personally, I had a shot where the main character Shang Chi sort of hits his dad, and his dad falls over and sort of is on one knee. And there's a shot that's about, I think it's about 15 seconds long or something. Or it might not have been that long. It might only have been about 10 seconds long. But it's a slow push into the dad's face as he's all grumpy and sad on the floor. And he's got this great big tuft of hair. Um, and The harsh yellow sunlight on the harsh yellow grass was shining straight through his hair. And I spent about 3 weeks of my life making that background look like the one that they wanted, and trying to get the light coming through his hair to look right, which might seem very, very mundane, but it's incredibly hard to get a hair detail off a moving background that's moving in front of grass that is entirely the wrong color. And especially when the light is so much brighter originally, because you have to sort of invent details that aren't there. Um, there are quite a few hairs in there that weren't his hairs. I manually painted them in. So there's something like that. And when you're watching it, you would never know, I don't think. And I'm pretty happy with that. But yeah, it's wow. That was one of those ones that I was talking about that went backwards and forwards a lot, a lot of notes, a lot of backwards and forwards, because this doesn't look right. That hair's wobbling. That one's not right. This edge looks too bright. That one looks too dark. You know, and that is so much of compositing in a nutshell. Really, is just stuff like that. Simple things that things that seem very simple that are very, very not simple. Um, and There was another one on Peter Rabbit, the Peter Rabbit 1, I think it was, the first Peter Rabbit movie. And there was a shot where they had the camera panning across, like moving sideways across this sort of open field. And they had little tracking markers on rods sort of throughout the field. And it was my job to get rid of the tracking markers, and trying to paint out tracking markers that are on little poles that are wobbling around in the breeze, so they're entirely useless as tracking markers anyway, in front of grass that's moving in front of other grass, for a shot that's about 15 seconds long. So it's a long shot, and you're looking directly at the grass the entire time, is incredibly difficult. And that was another one that took about 3, maybe 4 weeks in my life, was just getting rid of those tracking markers. So yeah, things like that. Basically little things, but little things that take a long
Yeah.
time.
And the devil is in the details,
Yeah.
as they say. Like you mentioned, the Australian sun. So,
Mm.
I, uh, yeah. So in
Oh
my
goodness, yes.
European imagination, I picture Australia as some, quite exotic country.
Oh, oh, that's not a way that I'd describe it. But
But I imagine it like
oh
being very
yeah,
dangerous, like full of those animals, like spiders, snakes. I don't know where
yeah.
it can be attacked by a kangaroo or whatever.
Birds, bugs, everything. There's small bears that drop out of trees and try to kill you. That's not a real thing, by the way. There's a lot of dangerous stuff, but I don't think there are other countries that are much worse for the dangerous animals. I think like there's a lot of sort of like anything near the Amazon forest. I think terrifies me. We do have spiders. We do have a lot of spiders. We do have snakes. We have a lot of snakes. There's no denying that. We have birds that try to swoop you and do damage if they hit you. There are things like that, but I think the further into the cities you get, the less and less frequent those things become. I have never been in a house that didn't have at least one spider living in the shower. They like the warmth. You learn to spot the spiders that aren't a problem. So there are two types in particular. There's the huntsman spiders, which are very sort of mild temperament things, and they don't tend to do anything to people. They tend to leave you alone if you leave them alone, and they take care of bugs and mosquitoes and things like that, the things that you don't want. And then there are the daddy long leg spiders, which I'm not sure. I think they might not be actual spiders, but they look like spiders, and that's good enough for me. Those ones are physically incapable of hurting you because their teeth are too small. But they do take care of, again, mosquitoes, bugs, flies, things like that that you don't want in your house, ants. So, those ones, if you see them, tend to leave them alone. But then there are so many dangerous ones. And if you see anything other than those two, squish it or throw it out of the house as fast as you can. But yeah, that like look, there are dangerous things, sure, but it's fine. I don't think anyone I don't think I've ever heard of anyone actually dying from a snake bite. So like not recently. There's been everyone sees snakes from time to time. They're pretty rare, but you do see them from time to time, and like they're not that big a deal. You just sort of oh no and back away slowly and avoid that area until it's cool because they like to sunbake. But that's about all it is really.
I tend to think about Poland, where I live, as quite a safe place in terms of like dangerous animals. But here in Gdańsk we have
Mm.
quite a big chunk of forest near the or inside the city, and there are wild boars living there,
Mm.
and they're all
Oh, oh, that's so exciting. It's-
usually they avoid people, but they get sometimes tempted to the food from
Mm.
garbage bins or stuff like that, and they even sometimes wander inside the city. So and these are really like these are dangerous
Mm.
animals, right? And yeah, I also haven't heard of
Yeah,
anyone
yeah,
being
yeah.
really hurt.
It's,
Like they're really dangerous when they are near their little ones. So they, then you have to really avoid. Mhm.
yes, yes. Well, so many animals are. I mean, there's a couple of animals that we have that are really not dangerous on the face of it, like koalas, and everyone loves koalas for some reason. They're kind of cute, but they've got dangerous claws, and they all have chlamydia. But they're fairly mild temperament. They've got a fairly mild temperament, as far as I'm aware. But yeah, if you get on the wrong side of one, it can do damage. They've got big claws and things. And then there's something like a wombat, for example, which is a relatively mild animal. They're not particularly dangerous in themselves, but if you hit one in a car, it's like hitting a rock, like a big rock, and it does extreme damage. Also, does damage to the wombat in that situation, yeah. But they also, because they're burrowing animals, they have been known to dig under people's houses and go straight through the foundations and make people's houses collapse. It is a thing that has happened. Um, so, there are things to watch out for, I think, everywhere. I don't think it really is. I don't think it's isolated to Australia. I think we just have a bit of a reputation for spiders and snakes, which is a bit unfortunate. Sharks as well.
How about the CGI community? Like, are there many 3D artists, like generally CGI people? Is there a vibrant community, or
It's a fairly small community. I mean, like the CGI community in general is fairly small, really. I mean, if you're working with a bunch of people, chances are, if you leave that company, you'll end up working with them again somewhere. Just because there's only so many companies and there's only so many people to do the jobs at those companies. So, and in Australia, it's particularly that way. There's sort of it's getting more it's getting larger very quickly because Australia's got a lot of funding for films and tax breaks and things like that. So a lot of stuff is getting filmed here now. Um, and that brings a lot of these CG companies, the things, places like ILM and Weta and these sort of places, they're all sort of migrating to Australia as well. There's a lot of these big companies here now, which is nice. Um, but it is still fairly small. There's everyone that works in this line of work knows someone that works in just about every other company. Um, so it's just kind of how it is. And as far as people using Blender in particular, I personally know about three other people that use Blender here. Not because there's not a lot of people using it here, just because apart from the fact that Blender's not an industry standard thing, so people in film jobs don't often use it. But I'm also someone who interacts much more with Blender people from overseas, just because of CG Boost and a bunch of other factors. But so I don't really interact with that many people that use Blender here. There are definitely they're around and they do use them. They do use it, but yeah, it is a very small community and. Which is a good reason to make sure that you're not being an unpleasant person as well. Just because if you are an unpleasant person at one place, you'll have a reputation for being an unpleasant person everywhere because everyone knows everyone. And that's just the way it is.
yeah, and that's funny that the most, at least on the in the YouTube tutorial area, the most popular guy is from Australia. So like the Blender guru, Andrew Price, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. Andrew, he's in Melbourne, I think. It's a fairly popular place for artists because it's a bit more of a vibrant atmosphere for younger people than somewhere like Sydney. And Sydney and yeah, there's Brisbane as well, but Sydney and Melbourne are the two largest cities. And Sydney tends to be more about sort of more traditional business, like these big corporate companies and places like that. And Melbourne tends to be a bit more artistic. Um, so yeah, that's where a lot of these sort of people go. But not me. I've been in Sydney and Adelaide. It's a whole
Yeah,
thing.
and you mentioned also in your resume, when I was doing like a little research on your
Mm,
person before the
yeah,
recording, you
yeah.
mentioned that you are also, let me read that maybe, that you are also a drummer.
Oh god, yeah, yep. been in a bunch of terrible bands. My uncle gave me a snare drum when I was about 6 or maybe 8. I wouldn't have been any older than that, I don't think. And I bet my parents regretted that. So I went from that to like a djembe, which is a sort of African drum, like one of those bongo style things. Um, and then I went from that to a full drum kit, and it's been a loud adventure ever since. But I haven't actually been able to play properly for the last couple of years because when we moved from Sydney to Adelaide a couple of years ago, I had to get rid of my drum kit. It just takes up so much space. Um, but I'm planning on getting back into it. I'm in the process of moving back to Sydney now, and when I move back at some point relatively soon, I hope to get another drum kit and get back into it because it's excellent fun. Making loud noises by hitting things. It's excellent.
especially for CG artists, because the job is mostly, being in front of the screen and moving mostly your hand muscles with the mouse or whatever. It's also like a physical, exercise sort of thing, right?
Well, I mean, for someone like me who's not a thin person, it's good. Any exercise you can get is good exercise, right? And for something as physical as drumming, it's good. You get very very sweaty. There are times when I've been practicing particularly hard, and I've had to immediately go and have a shower because I am just drenched. And so that's probably not the most attractive advertisement for drumming, but it's excellent, good fun. So
And physical exercise just like releases all those endorphins, so the sweat doesn't matter, right? Plus the music.
yeah, well, especially when the particular job you're working on is incredibly frustrating, being able to smash something nice and loudly is good. Releases some of the frustration.
Could you say a little bit about your musical fascinations? Like, what kind of music did you play? Like in those terrible bands as you described them.
Okay, so my taste in music tends to be sort of centered around sort of 70s and 80s music a lot of the time because my that's what my parents listened to, and particularly my dad. He's a very good bass player. Actually, he's in the middle of playing in a Bee Gees cover band, which is quite hilarious. It's excellent.
I recently discovered, like when researching for the show,
Mm.
that the Bee Gees were actually from Australia, and that was like a revelation
Yeah,
for me. I didn't know that.
yeah. But he's in a Bee Gees cover band, and he's actually pulling in some big crowds and things, which is pretty cool. But anyway, he's a lot of my music taste comes from him, and things like Rush and Supertramp and these kind of bands. They're sort of the baseline for what I tend to listen to. I've got a whole bunch of other stuff that I listen to, and I tend to listen to a lot of heavier things like Disturbed and Five Finger Death Punch and things like these bands that I listen to a lot. Um, but I tend to play more songs from that sort of Rush and Supertramp sort of era of music. So it's more where I tend to sit just because I prefer that style that's kind of hard to come by at the moment.
I discovered that Bee Gees thing when I was doing like a little poll on Twitter for the best band from Australia. Like the bands I know from Australia were the ACDC, Tame Impala. That was like kind of my most recent discoveries, like Tame Impala and In Excess.
Oh, goodness, yes, yes, in excess,
Yeah,
yes.
and that one, and also Nick Cave, which I'm a huge fan of Nick Cave.
Oh yeah. There's quite a few very good Australian bands. There's some good ones out there, but ACDC is it's that's the one
Yeah.
that everyone immediately thinks of. I would recommend giving a look to Cold Chisel, which is a very famous band here. I don't know how famous it is anywhere else because I have not been much out of the country, but it's a very very famous band here, and it's very good. It's good. It's good fun music, and um, I used to actually live around the corner at my one of my old houses. I used to live around the corner from the lead singer from that band, and it was his dog nearly attacked my dog. It's very exciting. So yeah, yeah. There's the Wiggles is a very very famous children's entertainment group. They are Australian too, and my dad, I think, I'm not 100% sure about this, but I'm pretty sure my dad went to the same army college as one of the Wiggles. So good times. Everyone knows everyone. 6 degrees of separation and all that.
There's also like the band you mentioned, the Wombats, but I'm reading the Wikipedia and they're from Britain, I guess. So it's
Wombats from Britain, as in the band or the animal.
the band, the Wombats. Okay, so
I was going to say the wombat is a very
yeah, it's very
Australian.
Australian, but they're British British and Norway.
Yeah, how
Ooh,
about that? Well, it's a good name, so I approve. Yeah.
All right. So the community thing is like probably. So I was talking with the previous guest about the Blender conference experience, and
Mm.
that's pretty hard for an Australian guy, I guess, to get to
Yeah.
Amsterdam, right?
Yeah, it's a bit of a trek. It's I think the last time I checked, it was about a 14, 15-hour flight.
Yeah.
And it costs a lot of money. So it's not really something that's within my scope of ability to get to at the moment. But yeah, we watch the highlights. That's what we do. Yeah. Yeah.
Luckily, there's
Unless you're lucky enough to get invited as a guest speaker like Andrew Price, then yeah, you're pretty much stuck here.
exactly like that. At least there's the online right now. That's everyone's kind of like more used to because of the COVID thing that happened.
Oh yes,
But it's not the same, really. It's
yes.
not the same.
I don't know. You're teasing me now.
Yeah, you can flip the coin, and there's like people from here would also love to go and see all those nice creatures in Australia, but it's not that easy, right?
Oh man. Yeah, yeah. I do get front row seats to kangaroos, which is something that fascinates the overseas
Yeah,
people. So that's
I
good.
only saw them at the zoo. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I didn't think about that. It's because we don't really have those sort of animals in zoos most of the time. We tend to have things like like tigers and lions and that sort of thing, and different like for example your wild boars, that sort of thing. Like that's the sort of thing that we often have in zoos here. But like kangaroos, everyone sees kangaroos. You go down the street and there's a couple of kangaroos on the side of the road. This is not news. We don't need to pay to see those ones. So, yeah, it's a different experience.
I hope that the episode really makes everyone just want to go to Australia.
Oh, you should. It's so good here. Everyone gets sunburn. It's excellent. You want to you want to go for a swim and get eaten. This is the place to be. Not really. It's actually some of the best beaches you will ever see in your life are here, which is yeah, a cool thing. Even though I don't particularly like the beach myself, I'm very pale. This is how I operate. But yeah, there's a lot of good things to see here. I would recommend coming and seeing.
And if people would like to see some of your work, although it's most of the time things that people should not really notice, right? The compositing part.
Oh yeah,
Where would they, see some, or maybe your personal projects? Is there a place where people can find your personal projects that you're developing?
Right now, I honestly I have a bit of an unfortunate tendency to start projects and not quite finish them, which is a very common thing I've heard.
No, not at all. Okay, we finished
No,
every single project.
but when I do a personal project, I do tend to post it in the CG Boost community just as I'm doing it. So if you join up there, you can see it there. But honestly, about 90% of the time when I'm working, it's on something that's going to be in the theater or on Disney Plus or something like that. So realistically, if you want to see my work, they're probably the best places to go. So yeah, and I'm hoping once I've finished up this big move and I've got a couple of things that I'm working on, once that's sort of wrapped up, I'll be able to start making some more personal project things. that will be actually something that people can go and see. So
Yeah, I've seen
yeah,
that. I've
see how
seen
that
that
goes.
modeling Hogwarts style architecture project that you're
Oh yeah, yeah,
doing.
yeah. That was a personal project of modeling Hogwarts. It's something that I've wanted to do since I was in college, and I haven't had. I've tried about 4 times over the years, and they were all dreadful. So I decided it's been a few years since I tried last time. I'm going to try it again, and it's going very well this time. So we'll see how that goes. I'll definitely at least attempt to finish that one. So
Yeah, and the
yeah,
community is there to help you with the feedback and like encouragement. So if anyone listening to the
yeah.
show would like a helpful and friendly community, like join the CG Boost community, it's of course that CG Boost sells paid courses. You can take them, and I highly
Mhm.
recommend this. Very good content for learning. But if you just want to hang out with fellow 3D artists and share your projects and just like have some feedback, some friendly
Mm,
discussions. The CG Boost community is open. Like you can join there free for free
mm.
and also see Daniel's private projects.
Yeah, you can see my personal project. Also, I would like to point out that that community, while it is obviously more centered around 3D work, it doesn't really matter what sort of thing you're working on. If you're someone who works primarily in 2D, you're someone like me who mostly works in compositing, or you're someone who's just trying to do 2D animation or anything at all, really. If it's something vaguely CG related or whatever, you just join up. I think it's. I know this. I know I work there, so it seems like a what's the word? I have a bit of a vested interest in taking you over there, but it's genuinely one of the few places I've ever been online where everyone is helpful and everyone is positive. I so rarely run into someone who's unpleasant there. It's a very, very rare thing. Most people are extremely helpful and extremely good at giving feedback. And it's just a really good place to hang out. And like, even if you just want to be inspired by someone else's stuff, you don't have to post anything.
Yeah,
You can just go there and look around and see what other people are doing. And it's a really cool place to be. So,
yeah.
yeah, would
Even
recommend.
if you think that your work is terrible, like if you've heard,
Oh, God, especially if you think your work is
yeah,
terrible.
just like the
Um,
podcast. I've recently got my first like really critical comment from a guy on YouTube, and he said like that people that don't speak fluently and sound bad, they shouldn't do podcasts. So sorry, it's not
ah,
perfect. I'm trying to improve the quality every time, but
you should quit. You should just quit. There's no hope for you. I'm
yeah.
sorry.
So
It's not
shout out
acceptable.
to the perfect feedback, and yeah, that is the last episode. Don't expect the next one, please. But if you like the podcast and you would like to hear more episodes from Subsurface Talks, just please subscribe, share it with your friend, and yeah, leave a comment below, maybe a positive one. That hopefully also like
Especially a positive one. I was on this one. I want every positive comment you have, so that's good.
yeah. So ending up on that note, thank you again, and Daniel, for taking the time to be a guest on the show, and wishing all the best uh, to your private personal projects and all those commercial ones that to be even more
Yeah.
dream jobs.
All right, thank you very much. It's been very good. It's been good fun being here, and yeah, thank you to everyone who listens or watches. It's been good fun.
Yep. So take care.